Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of Cannabis Unlocked. Today, I am honored to be joined by Courtney Davis, the Executive Director of Marijuana Matters. Courtney,
Hello,
how are you?
I'm fine. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, it's a pleasure.
Yeah, so to kick things off, would love if you would just give the listeners a little bit of your biography and background and how you got involved with Marijuana Matters.
Yeah, well, I have come from a career in public service. I worked for Colorado Senator Michael Bennett for about 10 years, starting off in the state office, doing some casework, and then eventually moving to DC to focus on policy work. I ended up really enjoying that for a time, but Capitol Hill and the Senate in particular just has a way of letting you know when it's time for you to move on. There are some lifers that end up retiring there, but for many of some of the younger folks, we end up either going to K Street or working in nonprofits or going to law school. None of those things that I wanted to do. I really was interested in cannabis. I had worked on agricultural policy for a while and got really interested, having had the opportunity to work on the 2014 Farm Bill, which authorized industrial hemp. And then, with Colorado being one of the early states to legalize, I was like, wow, I really would like to do a little bit more work in this space, but that wasn't really happening. It still really isn't happening in the Senate. And so I started doing my due diligence and networking and trying to find a policy job in DC where I could work on cannabis. And that's how I found Marijuana Matters and Khadijah Tribble, who's the founder of the organization, and started working there in 2020.
Fantastic. And so what is Marijuana Matters?
Yeah, Marijuana Matters is an organization that works to make sure that social equity is the keystone, the cornerstone of the legalized cannabis industry. And so we're not necessarily advocating for legalization or decriminalization or anything like that. We just understand that this is happening. These states are coming on board. The federal government is considering widespread cannabis legislation, and we want to make sure that as those considerations are being made, that there's equity within the law. And so the three ways that we do that are through our three pillars: education, entrepreneurship, and advocacy. And our education arm, we have a number of resources that we have, a Greenlight blog and podcasts where we highlight different aspects of the industry and folks that are participating and advocating for different policies. We host webinars, we participate in panels, and helping MSOs or community members understand what equity can look like in their towns or in their states. Our entrepreneurship arm, which we launched our boot camp last year, where we essentially have, last year we had 5 individuals that we were calling the Fab Five, and we helped them to, in whatever place they were in their business, we helped them to understand more about how they can participate in this industry and helping them plug some of those gaps that they need to take their business to the next step. And for our advocacy arm, we help public institutions and communities and MSOs as they're designing policies that are making sure that they keep equity in mind. And so we've worked in a number of different states, including DC, and helping them to understand what equity could look like as they're beginning to consider these policies, or to in states like Colorado, where they have an established industry but want to make a couple of changes to their programs. We're here to support them in those efforts.
That's fantastic. And I'd love to learn more about the boot camp and how maybe potentially people could join one. But maybe before we get into that, could you help to define what does social equity mean specifically as it relates to cannabis?
As it relates to cannabis, I mean, this is a tough question because it's a buzz phrase that folks have been throwing around for a while. And so, but it's not necessarily something that's new. And so essentially social equity is the equitable distribution of resources and services by public serving institutions. So that could be governments, corporations, NGOs, essentially to promote and ensure fair and equitable access to opportunities. And then as it relates to cannabis, we're talking about for individuals from communities that have been historically disadvantaged by the war on drugs. That is a lot, but the short version is that we're trying to create equity within an industry that has been propped up based on folks that have been in the legacy market, and also repairing harms from the failed war on drugs policy. And there is no one way to do that, but the best way to try and figure out how these policies can make the biggest impact is by including individuals that have lived these experiences and making sure that we're reversing policies that negatively impacted them and repairing the harm from the failed war on drugs policies. So that's how we see social equity. We think of it as an ecosystem. There is no social equity licenses are the answer. It's a lot larger than that. And that's why we exist, to kind of help create that drumbeat.
Thank you. That was a beautiful answer. And so as you talk about the war on drugs, it would be helpful to maybe better understand what were some of the main reasons that it became such an abject failure, and what are some of the collateral consequences that we continue to see from the war on drugs?
Essentially, the war on drugs, as we learned now, wasn't really a war on drugs. It was a war on people. And in particular, we're talking about folks that were in communities of color. It was something that in the Nixon administration, they decided that they were going to go after certain communities, and persons of color that were using marijuana were one of those targets. And so, you saw an over criminalization of communities, folks that have African Americans and persons of color are using cannabis at the same rate as whites, but are being imprisoned at a disproportionate rate, which is something that's still happening. And that is, just because there's a lot more police officers in certain communities than there are in others that are, just kind of canvassing the area. And it took a while for, the industrial prison complex, there was just there's decades of issues that that basically took place because of this war on drugs and war on people. And these laws, once a law becomes signed into, once a policy becomes signed into law, it either has to sunset or someone has to come and reverse it. And there are a lot of bad policies that continue to impact individuals that have been disenfranchised based on their sentences. And then the collateral consequences are essentially when an individual continues to be, when they continue to have be punished based on a punishment that they've already served. And so that could be a bar on receiving federal aid, FAFSA, because you have a criminal record where you have a drug felony charge of cannabis. That could be, we all know that felons in certain states aren't allowed to vote. That's the ultimate disenfranchisement of an American citizen. There are thousands of collateral consequences at state levels, whether it be not allowed to have a certain type of driver's license after a certain period of time. And so these are some of the issues that we continue to see. And, when we talk about legalizing cannabis, those policies have to be addressed, they have to be reversed. And we're, addressing those policies that are essentially were negatively impacting the community that we're now trying to prop up with legalization of cannabis.
Yeah, it's really disheartening that all this progress is made on the legalization front, yet on the social equity side, so many jurisdictions have continued to lag behind. And I'm curious to hear, are there some states you think have done it well, some that have done it poorly? Like, what are some of the lessons learned that we've seen as it relates to social equity in conjunction with the legalization of cannabis over the last decade or so?
Yeah, this is such a loaded question because even our, like Marijuana Matters, we have a social equity toolkit that is available on our website where we essentially give the guidelines of the principles of social equity. And one of the unique things about our organization is that we believe that there's a shared responsibility between communities, public institutions, and private businesses to create an industry that does no harm. And so we have recommendations for all of those groups of communities. And we highlight some, for each of those groups, we highlight, here's a couple of bills that we liked. Here's an MSO that's doing something that we like. Here's an example of community. And the cannabis industry is changing so much that it's hard to keep up with the actual bills and then the implementation, because some of the recommendations that we have, we may, things have changed. Illinois, for example, is one of the states that people in cannabis thought was, and we thought the policy was amazing. It was the first state that was able to legislate, that was able to create social equity through their state legislature. But a couple of years later, we now see that their social equity program has been held up in litigation for 2 years. These are individuals that are already struggling to survive, that have had to hold on to real estate, that are trying to hold off their investors. And so we see that some of these policies, when I worked on the Hill, we would write things, and I would always go through the congressional record to read and see what the senators were talking about, so that we can get to what their intention was with the policy. And I think the problem that we have now is that these policies are looking good on paper, or maybe some of them aren't, but they look good on paper, but the intent is not there and the implementation is lacking. And so I think we could learn from a lot of states, like Illinois, that have their lottery, and also Los Angeles, Oakland. But there are a lot of, I said there are a lot of programs that I do like Oakland, for example, has a program where they were giving grants to producers that weren't able to afford a kitchen business license. And so they're giving these individuals access to a shared kitchen. That's an example of a unique policy. Yeah, that's something that it's not a license, but these individuals that are able to process, their edible or their concentrate, but don't have the money for an industrial sized kitchen. And so I think that those are some of the, even some of these smaller policies are ones that I would say this is something that we support, and we encourage states to think a little bit more outside of the box in that case. But, in terms of some of the things that we do support, and that lessons that we've learned is that understanding that grants are better than high interest loans for social equity applicants, making sure that they are able, if the laws, if they're going to be required to hold on to real estate for X amount of times, and not have access to safe banking, it's not fair to loan these individuals money, and then 5 years later, when they still don't have their dispensary, to then ask for the money back with very high interest rates. And so there are some policies like that we understand now we should be asking for grants and not for loans. There's, New York is a state that folks are watching. They are planning to have a social equity fund like Illinois did. We're curious to see the implementation of that. And with implementation, that depends on who you have overseeing the program. Do you have individuals that have a background in cannabis? Do they understand cannabis? I mean, one of the examples that's not related to cannabis, but my friends and I were laughing about, one of the senators, I can't remember who it was, but Facebook came to testify, and he was asking, how do they make money if they don't make their users pay for to be on Facebook. And it's like, you really don't, you're overseeing these companies, these tech companies, and you don't really understand how this industry operates. And that is what we see in cannabis. Some folks don't understand how cannabis can operate, or, haven't been involved in anything in the legacy market. And they need a lot of training. Consumers need training and education. So there are a number of things that we think should be included in some of these policies. And it's hard to say which states are getting it right at this point.
Sure. Thank you. That was really helpful. And so flipping back to the boot camps that Marijuana Matters puts on, could you explain a little bit more about what that looks like?
Yeah, so we're a newer organization, smaller, and are really looking to give entrepreneurs a more intimate type of boot camp experience. And so what we have, in our application, we have accepted folks that are not operating, but folks that are living in states where cannabis is still illegal and are looking at either some of the CBD opportunities. And then we also have folks that are in, states where cannabis is legal. And so through, the diverse group of individuals that we have, we try to pull together a group of mentors that can come and speak to these individuals and meet them where they are. We have folks that are, operationalized here in Maryland, and we were able to help pay for part of a membership to a shared kitchen space so that they can continue to test and batch their products. And so there's no certificate of completion at the end, but we are for those individuals that need funding, we're helping them to connect them with funders. We had a partnership with 1863 Ventures, and they were able to go through that business boot accelerator program, which was really helpful. For our next year, we're really excited about opening up our application in the next coming months and hope that this program will be even more robust the second year around. But we're really, we like to call Marijuana Matters, our followers and supporters, our tribe. And so individuals that are a part of our boot camp continue to call on us for things. We'll continue to support them, help get their products in shelves when they're up and operationalized, and just make sure that they understand that the wealth of opportunities that the legalized industry can bring. Some of these folks aren't even plant touching. So that's a little bit about the type of boot camp that we're looking to run.
That's fantastic. And where can people go to find more information about the boot camps?
Our website, marijuanamatters.org, we will have all the information about the boot camp. We have some interviews and some blog posts that we've written where we interviewed some of the members of our boot camp. And we're also, I don't know if people are going to know how to find this, but we're going to be on DC TV in a couple of months. And they're going to profile some of the individuals here in the DC area that were a part of our boot camp and talk to them about their experience and where they are in their business.
Oh, fantastic. Well, if you want to share the link when that's up, we can also share it on our LinkedIn page.
Okay.
Great.
Awesome.
Yeah. And so then what about for companies operating in the cannabis industry or individuals who maybe want to make a donation to support either Marijuana Matters or other social equity programs? Are there any recommendations that you would have for folks who want to get involved?
Yeah, we would love and welcome that. I think part of the question that I get a lot is, how can we help? And a lot of times organizations want to create their own program or something, but there are so many organizations like Marijuana Matters that are established, that are working hard and could really benefit from funding and partnerships. And so, we have a donate button on our website. We also are selling shirts, Marijuana Matters shirts, which when we wear it, people are very interested and they're like, yeah, marijuana does matter. So kudos to Khadijah for coming up with a really dope name. Other organizations that we like to partner with, Uplift Cannabis, Minorities for Medical Marijuana, Minorities Cannabis Trade Association, Women Grow. These are a few of the organizations that we do a lot of great work with and know that they're working across the country and have access to a lot of minority business owners that are looking to have partners for their business.
Fantastic. And so then just looking forward to the rest of 2022, are there any potential regulatory reforms that you're excited about, or any other initiatives that you're keeping an eye on?
Yeah, we're following Congress and the administration. There are a lot of policy predictions for safe banking. I think this is like the 12th time it's been attached to a new vehicle. It's on the continuing resolution right now. Congressman Ed Perlmutter is retiring, and he is not going to rest this year until he gets safe banking passed. And so we are following that. Also, Senator Leader Schumer has his cannabis reform bill that we've been supportive of and have submitted comments. I think it's hard to say with this administration and with this Congress, having not been able to get many bills passed in general. I don't see cannabis being a priority, but we are here and a stakeholder and are going to be advocating for what we want to see should those bills come to fruition.
Great. Well, Courtney, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. This has been so much fun.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. And we'll plan to post that video from DCTV when it's ready. And in the meantime, folks, check out, was it marijuanamatters.org?
Yes.
Great. Great. Well, thanks again and have a great rest of your afternoon, Courtney.
All right. You too. Bye.
Okay.